All right, so today we're taking a deep dive into a really complex issue.
Sure.
We're talking about the potential impact of a mass deportation plan on the U.S. economy specifically. We've got like tons of research here, news articles, reports from think tanks, all sorts of stuff. And, our goal here isn't to like tell you what to think about it, but to kind of give you the information, the data you need to like form your own conclusions, you
Yeah.
know?
And I think it's really crucial to remember that we're not just talking about like numbers and statistics here. You
Yeah.
know, we're talking about people's lives,
Yeah.
millions of them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a really good place to start with like the human impact of this potential policy. So we're talking about potentially deporting 11 million undocumented immigrants, right? And a lot of them have been living in the U.S. for like over a decade.
And you have to consider the impact on families. I mean, think about it. 4 million families could be separated. That affects like 8.5 million U.S. citizens.
Yeah.
And those ripples, those effects, they spread out, not just to those who are deported, but to their families, their communities, everyone they rely on.
Okay, so we've got the human cost, right?
Right.
But then you look at the economic side of it, and it gets even more complicated. I mean, you've got these like two totally different pictures, these economic realities that people are debating.
Right, exactly. Some people are saying mass deportation would actually be good for the economy. Others are predicting, well, a disaster.
Yeah, and both sides have like all this data, all this research to back up their claims. So I guess let's unpack those arguments, starting with the potential downsides, I guess. What could go wrong?
Let's do that.
Okay, so the research, a lot of the research we looked at paints a pretty bleak picture. There's potential for GDP, gross domestic product, to go down by like 4.2 to 6.8%. And that translates to trillions of dollars, trillions, lost every year.
So that's right. And to give you some perspective, think about the Great Recession, right?
Mm-hmm.
The economic downturn back in 2008. The GDP loss then was about 4.3%. So we're talking about something potentially even bigger.
Wow. That's a scary thought.
It is. And it's not just the GDP either. You also have to consider the potential loss of tax revenue. Undocumented immigrants, they contributed over $76 billion to federal, state, and local taxes in 2022.
Wow, that's a huge amount. So where does all that money go, and what happens if it just like disappears?
Well, think about all the services that are funded by tax revenue, right?
Good.
Schools, roads, healthcare. I mean, losing that income would put a massive strain on budgets, government budgets at every level, federal, state, local.
Okay, so we've got like potential GDP shrinkage. We've got this loss of tax revenue. What about jobs?
Mhm.
Isn't the argument that mass deportation would actually free up jobs for American citizens?
Yeah, that's a common assumption, yeah.
Mm.
But the reality is it's more complicated than that. Let's look at the construction industry, for example. I mean, construction relies heavily on immigrant labor,
Right.
right? And it's estimated that mass deportation could result in a 14% reduction in their workforce.
Yeah.
I mean, that's huge.
14%. So like imagine you're walking down the street and like 1 in 7 construction sites is just like standing still.
Right, exactly. Projects delayed, costs going way up.
And wouldn't those delays like have a ripple effect like on all the other businesses that are, supplying materials and equipment?
Absolutely. The businesses that are transporting goods, processing the food. I mean, you lose jobs in one sector and boom, it can trigger a chain reaction across the entire economy.
Right. And it's not like you can just snap your fingers and suddenly have all these American workers to fill those jobs, right?
Exactly. These jobs, a lot of them require specialized skills, years of experience, things that, might not be readily available in the domestic workforce.
So mass deportation equals more jobs for Americans. Maybe, maybe not.
Yeah, I think the reality is a lot more nuanced. I mean, if you look at history, you actually see that past efforts to deport large numbers of immigrants, so what it's actually led to job losses for U.S.-born workers. I mean, the economy it's a complex system, right?
Mm-hmm.
And disrupting it like that, it can have all these like unintended consequences. We were just talking about, construction jobs, but the potential for job losses from mass deportation. I mean, it wouldn't just stop there, right?
Right.
Think about your local grocery store. What if all of a sudden they had like 13% fewer workers?
Oh, wow.
You'd have empty shelves, long lines at the checkout, maybe even higher prices for all the food you need.
Yeah. That's not good.
No, and that's the reality facing the agricultural sector.
Mhm.
They could lose almost 13% of their workforce.
Okay, so we could be looking at Empty construction sites, empty grocery store shelves. I mean, where else could this ripple effect be felt? I mean, what
Well,
else?
everywhere, really.
Yeah.
I mean, think about all the businesses that are, connected to those industries, like construction and agriculture,
Hmm.
the ones uh, supplying materials, transporting goods, processing food. I mean, you could see entire local economies just thrown into chaos.
Yeah, so it's not just about the people who are directly employed in those industries, right? It's
No.
about that ripple effect that spreads out, like
Ah,
throughout the whole community.
exactly. And we haven't even like touched on the impact this could have on entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
We're not just talking about workers here, but also business owners. I mean, our research shows that almost a million undocumented immigrant entrepreneurs would be affected by mass deportation.
Wait, 1 million? Wow, what kind of businesses are we talking about here?
Oh, everything. Restaurants, shops, construction companies, even tech startups. I mean, these entrepreneurs, they generated like over $27 billion in business income in 2022. They create jobs, they fill niche markets, they contribute to the vibrancy of their
And
communities.
they would just like disappear.
Well, yeah, that's the risk. And their absence wouldn't just be an economic loss, right? It would be a loss of innovation, of creativity, of that drive that fuels so much of our economy.
Yeah, it's a good reminder that behind all these numbers, all these statistics we're talking about, there are real people
Absolutely.
with dreams, with families.
With a stake in this country's future.
Yeah.
And it's not just entrepreneurs either, right? It's the entire undocumented immigrant population. They contribute over $250 billion in consumer spending every year.
Wow.
That's money that's going into local businesses. It's supporting jobs. It's keeping those communities afloat.
Okay, so they're entrepreneurs, they're consumers, they're taxpayers, they're workers. I mean, it sounds like removing them from the equation would have just this massive impact on the economy, like at every level.
Yeah, and that's a conclusion that a lot of economists and policy experts are reaching. And it's not just about direct costs either, right? I mean, think about property values. Think about them plummeting in neighborhoods where families are uprooted. Think about school enrollment dropping and the impact that has on funding and resources.
Yeah, it's like this downward spiral that could affect every aspect of community life. And honestly, it's kind of starting to feel a little overwhelming just to think about all of it.
I know it's a lot to digest, but remember, the goal here isn't to scare you. It's to equip you with knowledge, with information, to help you understand.
Right, right. Okay, so where do we go from here? We've explored the potential economic fallout, the labor market disruptions, the impact on businesses and entrepreneurs. What's next?
Well, there's this giant elephant in the room that we haven't even talked about. The cost. The cost of actually carrying out this massive deportation plan.
Oh, yeah, right. The price tag. I mean, expanding detention facilities, hiring more immigration enforcement agents, transporting millions of people, navigating all the legal challenges. That can't be cheap.
No, not at all. I mean, we're potentially looking at hundreds of billions of dollars
Yeah.
every year,
Yeah.
all borne by taxpayers.
Wow. Hundreds of billions. I mean, that's money that could be going towards, education, healthcare, infrastructure, things that benefit, all Americans.
Exactly. It's a question of priorities. What do we as a nation want to invest in? What do we want to spend our money on?
Yeah, and it's not just about, the financial costs either. There are like intangible costs too.
Sure.
Like the erosion of trust in communities. The fear and uncertainty that families are going to be facing, the damage to our reputation on the world stage.
Absolutely. It really starts to feel like the potential costs, both tangible and intangible, far outweigh any perceived benefits.
Yeah, that's a sobering thought. So with all this information in mind, like what does this mean for our listener? What can they take away from all of this?
I think the key takeaway here is that mass deportation, it's not a simple solution. It's a complex issue. It has far-reaching consequences that we really need to consider carefully. I mean, it's about looking beyond the rhetoric and the sound bites and really understanding the full scope of the potential impact. Yeah.
And it's about remembering that we're not just talking about numbers and economic indicators, right?
Right.
We're talking about real people, real families, real communities.
Yeah. Exactly. As we wrap up part 2 of this deep dive, I want you to think about this.
Yeah.
Given the potential scale, the scope of this proposal, what what questions do you have for your elected officials,
Mm.
for your local business leaders, for your neighbors?
Yeah.
This is a conversation we need to be having as a nation.
Okay, so welcome back to our deep dive on mass deportation and the U.S. economy. We've covered a lot of ground,
Yeah.
and it's been heavy stuff. But we're not going to end on like a note of doom and gloom. Okay, we're going to shift gears now and actually talk about some potential paths forward, some alternative solutions, some things like that. What do you think? Where do we go from here?
Well, I think a good place to start is by just acknowledging that our current immigration system, it's a mess.
Yeah.
It's outdated, it's overloaded, it's frankly in desperate need of an overhaul.
So we're not dealing with a simple problem here, right?
Yeah.
This is a complex issue that's been, building for decades.
Exactly. And as we've seen, mass deportation, it's not the answer. It's costly, it's impractical, and it would just cause more problems than it solves.
Yeah.
So what are the alternatives?
Yeah. All right, let's get into that. What are some other approaches we could consider?
Well, one option that's often discussed is comprehensive immigration reform. And this would involve, creating a pathway to citizenship for undocumented immigrants who meet certain criteria, of course, things like paying taxes, passing background checks, and learning English.
So instead of trying to like remove millions of people, we could actually be like integrating them, more fully into society.
Right. And it's not just about, doing the quote unquote right thing. It's also about smart economics. I mean, studies have shown that granting legal status to undocumented immigrants, it could actually boost GDP by trillions of dollars over the next decade.
Wow. Okay, so that's a significant economic benefit. So how do we make this happen? What needs to happen to get comprehensive immigration reform off the ground?
Well, that's where things get tricky. It requires political will. It requires compromise. It requires a willingness to put aside partisan differences and really work together, for the common good.
Yeah, and that's a tall order, especially in today's political climate.
It is, but it's not impossible. I mean, history shows us that even the most seemingly intractable problems, they can be solved when people come together, when they have that shared commitment to finding solutions.
Okay, so that's comprehensive immigration reform. What other options are kind of on the table?
Well, another approach is to focus on targeted enforcement efforts, and this means prioritizing the removal of individuals who pose a genuine threat to public safety. People like those with serious criminal convictions.
So instead of this blanket approach of just, deporting everyone, we're talking about a more focused approach.
Exactly, a more strategic approach to enforcement.
Yeah.
And that allows us to allocate resources more effectively, to focus on the cases that truly pose a risk, and to avoid tearing families apart unnecessarily.
Right. And that sounds like a much more, humane approach, and also probably more fiscally responsible.
It is, and it aligns with, with the values of fairness and justice that ideally we all aspire to.
Okay, so we've got comprehensive immigration reform, and we've got these targeted enforcement efforts as two potential paths forward. What about our listeners? What can they do to kind of get involved in this conversation to make a difference?
Well, I think the first step is always education. Read articles, listen to podcasts like this one, attend community forums. The more informed you are, the better equipped you'll be to engage in constructive dialogue and advocate for change.
Great advice. What else can listeners do?
Don't underestimate the power of your voice. Reach out to your elected officials. Let them know where you stand on this issue. Share your concerns, share your hopes, share your ideas. I mean, politicians, they're more likely to listen when they hear from their constituents.
So make your voice heard. Let your representatives know what you think.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And finally, get involved in your community. Support organizations that are working to help immigrants. Advocate for policies that promote fairness and justice. And speak out against hate and intolerance.
Yeah, it's a good reminder that we can all make a difference, no matter how small our actions may seem.
Absolutely. Change starts with each one of us.
Well, this has been an incredibly insightful and thought-provoking deep dive. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise and helping us navigate this complex issue.
It's been my pleasure.
And to our listeners, we hope this has empowered you with, the knowledge and the tools you need to engage in this crucial conversation. Remember, the future of our nation, it depends on our ability to create a just and humane immigration system that benefits us all. Thanks for listening.